In this lecture, we'll talk about the CFA Level 2 reading on the integration of financial statement analysis techniques. This is the last reading in FRA, and since we do not have FRA at Level 3, this is the last FRA reading in the CFA program. So what you will notice in this reading is something that you saw at the start of Level 1, which is a framework for doing financial statement analysis, and then 3 case studies which use the material that you have learned at Level 1 and Level 2. So there is nothing new in this reading. It is just an application of all that you have learned. What I'll do in this lecture is talk about this introduction, remind you of the framework, and then just give you a high-level view of these case studies. Your job then is to go through these case studies on your own, and then a separate video will be made available which talks about those case studies. These case studies, especially this one, the first one, is very long and elaborate. So you are not going to get something this elaborate on the exam, but clearly there will be excerpts or parts of this that might come on your exam. First, let's go over the financial statement analysis framework. This is based on Exhibit 1 in the curriculum, and if you look at the curriculum, the framework is exactly what you saw in the first reading of Level 1. So we are closing off this topic by going back where we started. The difference was that at the start of Level 1, you were told, here is the framework, and then you are going to learn the pieces that will allow you to use the framework. Now you are being told that, look, you have learned all the pieces. You have learned about everything from dealing with inventory to long-lived assets to taxes, intercorporate investments, long-term liabilities, leases. Now here is the framework that you will actually use when you evaluate companies. So in that framework, what is the first step? It is to articulate the purpose and context based on your function, the client input, and organizational guidelines. For example, let's say that you are an equity research analyst and you are told to evaluate a company, say Siemens, as to whether it is a good long-term equity investment. You are working for a team of portfolio managers. So that is an objective. Based on that objective, what is your deliverable? So deliverable from the first step. The deliverable is a written statement of the objective. And then what are the questions that need to be answered as part of this analysis, this report? And then what is the timeline? What is the budget for doing this work? So this is step 1. Then once step 1 is done, then you go to step 2, which is collect data. Again, if you are evaluating a particular company, you collect the financial statements. You might also need other information such as the financial statement of competitors. You might want to speak to company executives. You might want to speak to the suppliers, the customers. Maybe you try to speak to competitors. So you collect data and then organize that data. Then you process the data. So you come up with your common sized statements, ratios, graphs, forecasts, and you analyze and interpret the processed data. These 2 steps are very related, and you will notice that in all 3 case studies, step 3 and step 4 are bundled together, because you come up with a common sized income statement, for example, and then as you come up with the income statement, you can immediately start analyzing what is happening to the various elements over time or relative to competitors. Once you have your results, then you need to develop and communicate your conclusion and recommendation. At a very basic level, you need to conclude whether to buy this equity or not to buy. And your conclusion needs to be justified. So you publish or you write that report, and the report should answer the questions that were raised in step 1 and meet the objective of what you initially outlined. And then, as always, there is a follow-up process. You've made the equity investment, let's say the recommendation here was a buy, but then do you just sit back and relax, or do you evaluate every quarter, or based on some frequency or some interval, you go back and see whether all the assumptions you made or your reasoning for the decision, whether that reasoning still holds. So there always needs to be a follow-up process, and your recommendations are then updated accordingly. Now, briefly, the first case study that I've already alluded to, long-term equity investment, where you are given a substantial amount of data related to Nestle, and the curriculum is actually organized using the framework that I just talked about. It's the curriculum, the CFA Institute's framework. But the interesting part about this case study is that it uses a lot of material that you have seen before. Again, I'll emphasize nothing overly new, but this is interesting. You do the DuPont analysis. Very briefly, what DuPont analysis does is takes the return on equity and decomposes it to figure out where the return on equity is coming from. Is it coming because of operational efficiency? Is it coming because of high profit margins? Is it coming because of high leverage? So you need to understand. You need to understand the asset base, the capital structure. Maybe if the company is heavily leveraged, will that be an issue given that you are investing for the long term? Yes, so you need to understand the capital structure. What are the various segments that the company is operating in? Examination of the company's accruals. This is material that we just saw in the previous reading, and what is the impact on the quality of earnings. You study the company's cash flows. You also have a very interesting scenario here with Nestle has ownership in other companies based in other countries. The complication there is that this combines intercorporate operations, intercorporate investments, and multinational operations. So that, I think, is almost as hard as it gets. You try to decouple this. I think the probability of that combination showing up on the exam is low, but it can still happen. So this is useful. But to be very honest, I think that this case study is much more useful from a real world perspective. Because when you go do a real analysis, this is an excellent template to follow. So that's why I say you do this, and even if you don't spend enough time on this before the exam and you are in this line of work, then spend time on it after the exam. All right, case study 2 has to do with off-balance sheet leverage from operating leases. This is an application of what you saw at level 1 with leases, and then again you studied this at level 2. And the practice problems also talk about this. When you have a company that makes excessive use of operating leases, what do you as an analyst need to do? You need to convert those to capital leases and look at the impact on the balance sheet, income statement, and various ratios. So that is what this particular case study does. More specifically, the objective here is that you are a fund manager and you are sitting on top of lots of companies, and you want to figure out which companies have an excessive usage of off-balance sheet financing. So that is the objective, and based on that objective you do a certain analysis. And then case study 3 deals with anticipating effects of changes in accounting standards. Is it possible that you expect the accounting standard to change in a certain area? It's possible. This particular case study is based, I think, in 2007. And at that point, there was some thought about taking this accounting related to special purpose vehicles. In the past, special purpose vehicles were treated separately and not consolidated. So in this case, there is some securitization taking place by a company, and the SPV, the special purpose vehicle, that information is not being consolidated. If there is potentially new accounting regulation that will require the SPV to be consolidated, then should you not as an analyst be able to do that and see, okay, what will the impact on the financial statements be like? Obviously that is something you should do. This is just one example. When you are doing work, there might be other accounting standards that might be changing. For example, the treatment of AFS and held to maturity securities will be changing a little bit. So you as an analyst need to study the impact of that. So that is it in terms of this reading as well as FRA. As I said, do the case studies, but I'll emphasize, don't get hung up. Literally, you can spend, I think, a few days on case study number 1, but you might not have a few studies for just that one case study. So go through it and spend time based on the amount of time that you have. But the practice problems, this you must do because this is good revision. Make sure you do this though after you are done with the rest of FRA, because this material builds on what you have studied from before. There are no examples here. The examples are the case studies. and as always, practice as much as possible. And a concluding remark related to FRA is that this is extremely important. It's about 20 to 25% of your exam. So make sure you do well. It's very hard to pass the exam without doing well on FRA. That is it.